My name is Makayla Bailey. I'm the co-director of Rhizome. We're an affiliate of the New Museum, and I'm here with Simon Wu of Arkive and Paul Hill of Strada World. I'll also be talking on behalf of Rachel Rossin, who's an artist who founded Dunkunsthalle, a new project space in the financial district, who couldn't be with us today, but we've been in conversation for a little bit, so I'll do my best. And yeah, I'll start with me finding the clicker. That's me, literally in my lap. Yeah, so I'll introduce a little bit about Rhizome and pass it on to Simon and then Paul. So Rhizome is a nonprofit. We champion born digital art and culture through commissions, exhibitions, scholarship, and digital preservation. And as some of you might know, I think over the last few years, the conversation about digital art has transformed and expanded and beyond, ways that many of us never really imagined. At the same time, for over 25 years, Rhizome as an organization has played an integral role in supporting and shaping both the past, present, and future of contemporary art, especially art that engages with digital technology and the internet. And so, like I said, we're an affiliate in residence at the New Museum, and which is Manhattan's leading destination for contemporary art. So on this slide, I'll just talk about a couple of projects I think that have kind of flourished due to our support. So you have our website on the top left corner, and that's a new website that was designed by Laura Coombs and Mindy Sue. It was unveiled in February. It features more of a tag-based interface for searching, so kind of an experimental way to have a website. Below you see another project that we did called Net Art Anthology, where we basically preserved and presented 100 digital artworks that exemplify the history and hopefully the future of net art, and that was in 2016. So we're definitely due for an update. On the top right, you'll see Image Atlas, which was a project by Taryn Simon and activist and overall amazing advocate Aaron Swartz. This was completed in 2012 at our 7-on-7 conference. 7-on-7 is a conference that was founded in 2010, and it pairs artists with technologists with a really simple prompt, which is to make something new. And so at that conference, the image below actually is a screen grab from the 2014 7-on-7, where we paired Kevin McCoy and Anil Dash. And at that conference, they minted the world's first NFT in 2014. All right, so yeah, we collaborate with artists, creatives, thought leaders, and we really try to engage the biggest questions of our time. And so this summer, we're gonna be unveiling a new partnership with TR Lab, and this partnership focuses on storytelling about the history of generative art. And so we're gonna kick this off this summer with the Rhizome Benefit, which will be at the New Museum and celebrate 20 years of our affiliation, which is really exciting. So yeah, Rhizome's a word for a root-like structure that kind of expands in more of a non-hierarchical nature. And so that's how we try to exist in the world. We want to be just one point of a really big network that's collaborative and involving digital culture. We want to connect people and kind of tell stories that would otherwise be lost. So to touch on that, I'll go more into our preservation program, which I think is something that maybe most people don't know that much about. And so, yeah, Rhizome has been for quite a while, I would say, at the forefront of pretty groundbreaking methods for digital preservation. Yeah, so some of you might be thinking what is digital preservation? Why does it matter? And I think the example I always use is when you go look for a link and it's 404 not found, and there's kind of no way to know what that was or what it's supposed to be. And so I guess I'll just talk a little bit about that. Today's kind of understanding of history is based on objects, fragments of writing, and other artifacts that happen to survive the passage of time. So that might be a painting or a shard of ceramic, right, from a long time ago, and that forms a direct link to past kinds of culture. And in the future, I think the artifacts that will inform history are going to be increasingly digital. So I'll quote one of the fathers of the internet, Vint Cerf, on why this matters. Collectively, we have a big challenge ahead of us if we want our descendants to understand anything about our current culture, given that it is so laced with online environments. So we have a problem. These pieces of culture are going to need complex infrastructure in order to survive for the future. Like a couple years ago, Adobe Flash was discontinued. Like things just change all the time. But I have good news, is that Rhizome has built an infrastructure that supports this. And it's free and open to the public. But yeah, what does this look like in real life for an application? So here you have some screen grabs from our December presentation of Cyber Powwow, which was the first museum presentation of this project, and it was at the new museum. So Cyber Powwow started in 1997. It was one of the first major online exhibitions, and it was founded by an indigenous collective called Nation to Nation Collective, which is Skawanati, Ryan Rice, and Eric Robertson. So we restored this project, which features like so many unique virtual rooms that were interactive. There was a chat room. It was very like groundbreaking for the time. But without preservation, the software that hosts it, has been lost to time and would be lost to kind of our current moment. We've also preserved like Instagrams, Tumblrs, and other things like that. So I think looking to the future, like Rhizome is going to continue to amplify and support more non-traditional stories about who actually contributes to our culture. I think most of us wouldn't think about, Nation to Nation Collective being at the absolute forefront of something like this, and something that informs, the metaverse, AI, all kinds of interactive forms of technology today. So yeah, Rhizome's a pretty small team, and we love this work, but we can't do it without being in conversation with a lot of people, hopefully some of you in this room as well. And so yeah, as I end, I'm really excited to talk to some people that I've met and been in conversation with for a while, and who are like helping me shape that story, and hopefully we can all together also shape that story with you. I'm gonna pass it off to Simon Wu from Arkive. Oh, right.
Hi everyone, I'm Simon. Thank you, Makayla, for the intro, and thank you, Emily, for the invite. I'm happy to be here with you all today. I hope we can have time afterwards to talk and such. My name is Simon. I'm a writer and curator. I'm here today to speak to you a bit about my work at this organization called Arkive. And it was founded maybe a little more than a year ago, so extremely, extremely recently. And the idea behind it being the world's first decentralized physical museum. So if in a traditional museum structure, you have a board of trustees that the curators then propose works that will then enter the collection. Arkive's model is that the board of trustees is instead anyone who wants to join, based on a model called a decentralized autonomous organization, or a DAO. And these are primarily run on Discord, in person, but they fulfill a lot of the curatorial duties that a board might in a traditional museum structure. So we still have curators. I'm a curator on the board. And what we do is we select objects and we present them to the Discord, which at the moment has about 2,500 members, and anybody can apply. It's free. It's based on sort of demonstrated interest and participation. And you kind of mimic the internal acquisition structures of a museum. And we present artworks based on acquisition themes or seasons. And then the Discord, all 2,500 or whoever is participating in that particular moment, will have conversations about the works, sort of discuss museum acquisition level kind of conversations, like what do you think the significance will be in 10 years, 20 years, 100 years, and then collectively vote to acquire an object. And so currently, although they're open to acquiring digital works, we primarily focused on acquiring physical works. And the works, once they're acquired into the collection, are then placed with an existing museum, the idea being that it can exist as a kind of network. So just to give you a little bit more concrete images of how it works, one who is an archive member, once you've applied and joined, you would see something like this in your dashboard. And as I mentioned, this is barely a year old. It's extremely, extremely new, and it's truly an experiment in what it would be like to kind of decentralize curation in museums. And although it engages Web3 technology in that all of the voting is on Web3 chain systems so that it's verifiable, it otherwise functions as any other kind of group might. We're not necessarily collecting NFTs. We haven't collected NFTs, although we are open to using NFT technologies for voting processes, for provenance research, and then perhaps down the line for creating a kind of self-sustaining resource system for Arkive itself. So this is kind of what you would see when you enter, and the way that people are sort of incentivized to participate is through a simple sort of point system that if you participate in the Discord and talk about the acquisition round, we have our acquisition round coming up this week currently, looking at some works by Josh Klein, but this is an example of a acquisition we did earlier this year where we looked at 3 works by the Puerto Rican artists Jennifer Alora and Guillermo Calzadilla. And these are the sort of 3 works, and when you click through to them, you would see normally what would remain an internal document in a museum structure, which is essentially an acquisition proposal, except here it's sort of made public to the members. And then you, as a member, would sort of assess these works and kind of determine, based on this artist's oeuvre, the specific kind of positioning, the current exact work, whether you think it should enter the collection or not. And they're usually, we supplement them with kind of different levels of discourse, where you have things that discord at a more kind of casual sort of comment-based level. But we also have a curatorial call that we have every acquisition round, where we either speak to the artists themselves, so this is the Zoom call that we had with the artists themselves, kind of hearing about the works. And then afterwards, this is kind of like what the Discord looks like. It's very chaotic and kind of frenzied, but each round itself kind of has a discussion that happens, and along with my co-curator, Isabel Flower, we launched a magazine component to it so that we could extend the acquisition conversation and engage different scholars and critics so that they could weigh in on the thoughts of which work they believe should be acquired. So through the process of this was the work that was selected by the archive community to be acquired. And then just this year, through another archive member, Shani Lanigan, who works near the Calgary Central Library. It's this really beautiful building, if you haven't been, designed by Snowetta. And we were able to place the work with them on a 5-year loan in the public library itself. The idea being that if in most museums less than 10% of the collection is shown at any time, all the works that are acquired via Arkive would be placed in a museum around the world. Globally, that is sort of context specific in some ways. So, other acquisitions that we've done are this Lynn Hirschman Leeson work, the MTV Video Music Awards Moonman prototype. So part of it is to de-hierarchize an idea between artworks and culture, and think more broadly about what kinds of conversations can be had. And other works we acquired were a video by Aria Dean, and then the fans from Madonna's Vogue 1991 MTV performance. And these are still in the process of being placed in separate locations. And then this is the most recent or current round of acquisitions that we're doing. These are just sort of selections, but we recently acquired a Galaporis Kim, a work by the ceramicist Toshiko Takaezu. And currently, we are looking at an acquisition of works by Josh Klein, who has a retrospective, or survey, I should say, at the Whitney Museum currently. So that's the general vibe around Arkive. I'm happy to talk more about the specifics of it, but I'll hand it to Paul so that we can continue the conversation.
Thank you. I'm Paul. I'm the founder of Strada. I enjoy making things, and what we've recently made at Strada came to fruition after summer 2020 when I developed my first application, Pronto. Kind of the problem solution there was, at the time, a lot of resources in order to volunteer or donate to organizations fighting for Black Lives Matter are mostly scattered across Instagram. And at the time, I just wanted to create one centralized application where people can, select their city and immediately either volunteer or donate to an organization within their city that they can then support. And at that time, it just immediately blew up. Within a couple of months, we had over 20,000 users, and that was the first realization of understanding that, community-centered solutions, so these sort of like larger complex problems really work. And I wanted to apply that to something else within my life that I'm also extremely passionate about, given, having been making art for my entire life, and then at that summer, then trying to sell my own screen prints to afford rent in New York City. I realized the high barrier of entry for artists to be able to grow their careers within the fine arts world. One, selling artwork. Two, just growing a community of other artists and collectors within their network. And then also like the resources and tools to then scale that career on a larger scale. And that took the form of Strada. At first, started off super ambitious with a full-fledged online marketplace where any artist can create their own profile and sell directly to collectors on their own. There is a sort of a curatorial practice there where we were selecting the artist, making sure it wasn't just open to anyone and everyone, just to maintain that sort of curation. And then understanding that we might have jumped a bit too far ahead and wanted to scale back and meet artists and collectors at what people are most comfortable at right now. So scaled it back, brought it back to in-person exhibitions where we showcase young emerging artists who we genuinely believe are going to be the top artists of our generation, predominantly from marginalized backgrounds as well. And as we've been growing through these in-person exhibitions and building a community of artists and collectors and growing a name for ourselves, we've actually now brought it back to the online sector where we have artworks pretty much from A to Z. So on the more affordable scale, introducing younger collectors to this idea of art collecting. So you're not only, just have the options of works that are $5K plus available, but you now also have works that are in between that $70 to $300 price range, but they're also way more functional. So, think about your favorite sculptor who's making these extremely expensive ceramic works, but is also making these beautiful mugs that have the same bust as the sculptures. And comparison, a sculpture of theirs would probably go for like between $3,000 to $500, but this mug, for example, goes for about like $200. And that's just been a great way to introduce a younger collector base to this idea of art collecting, making sure that we can still, lower that barrier of entry without, sacrificing the artist's career and holding them back. Strada's very new. We just launched in the past 1.5 to 2 years, and everything that we do has been very experimental. And as we're experimenting, we're seeing what works, and when we find something that works, we just dig deeper into it, always evaluating, what can be improved on and what's going to be next. And what we have coming up for this summer is that we've just launched our Strada Athletics Club, introducing creative communities to this idea. Hey. Here's an example of one of our exhibitions. I was not aware that I had this entire presentation. This is awesome. This is one of our exhibitions in Moonlight We Turn Blue. I personally have always viewed fashion as a part of the fine arts world, even though it's not traditionally seen in that space unless it's, through the Metropolitan Museum, such as the Heavenly Bodies exhibit, for example. And what I wanted to do is introduce fashion to the fine art world on, on a more accessible level, that being like the gallery sphere. This exhibition we had in October was in collaboration with fashion designer Telfik Abijako. And the goal here was to sort of merge our two identities communities into one exhibition while also including different artists whose work mesh well with his fashion works. So on his end, we selected works from his most recent Met Gala selections, as well as his most recent New York Fashion Week show. Building off of this idea of identity and home, given that his recent show is Memories of Home, just thinking about where each of us have lived throughout our lives and which of those areas have been most impactful. Taufik being from Nigeria and including an artist who also works in textiles, also from Lagos as well as other artists who work in textiles from North Carolina, as well as New York and Chicago too. We also take an educational component with our community. When we've had an exhibition, it's also paired with working with one of the artists as well to lead a workshop afterwards. So one of the sculptors or ceramicists that we've worked for hosted this workshop the day afterwards. Kind of the problem that we saw with the traditional gallery space is that, regardless if you're like a Gagosian or if you're one of the smaller galleries just starting out, the majority of the days that you're open, the gallery is going to be empty. So how do we provide a space that brings in as many people as possible while also engaging people in the artwork and also developing new skills? So I thought that this was a great way to do so. We had a really great reaction from the community. Definitely looking forward to doing more of these in the future. This is what I mentioned prior, where we just launched the more accessible price point artworks that are also functional on the site. It's the Strada Design Lab. And these are a few of the select pieces that we have from our first collection that just launched on May 3rd. Just another photo from one of our exhibitions that we had in LA. With Strada being a non-traditional gallery, I've really been looking at what are sort of the biggest hurdles and like the biggest problems with traditional spaces currently. And a large part of that is, the financial aspect of that 50-50 split, which, isn't necessarily malintentioned. It's just more of sort of like a situational aspect of owning a gallery space with a permanent long-term location that very frequently comes with a massive overhead cost that many gallerists, although very ambitious, are not typically often able to necessarily afford, leading them to necessarily have to have that 50% split. But with Strada, we actually don't have a permanent location. And everything that we've done has been on a modular model. Every exhibition is a completely new location. We don't repeat locations, which one gives us more flexibility as to when we have an exhibition and doing it on our own time and what makes best for us, what makes most sense for the artist, but it also allows to include that space as a part of the curatorial process as well. We're able to choose a space that works best with the artist and the artworks. This is a photograph just kind of launching our recent partnership with Nike. It's the Strada logo and braided into the model on the left's hair, and then the Nike logo on the right. I think we're going to talk about this later on in the conversation as well. We'll chat more about the sort of the process of how we select partners and making sure it's not the reverse aspect where we're trying to have a partner choose us. But yeah, we'll chat more about that soon.
Cool. If you can hand me the clicker, I'll tell everyone a little bit about what Rachel Rossin is doing with Dunkunsthalle. Wrong way. Okay. So this is an image from one of Rachel's artworks. I believe it's called The Maw of, and it's a KW and Whitney commission. And Rachel's, a digital artist who's really involved in the contemporary scene right now, and basically took a big leap of faith in, repurposing what was formerly an abandoned Dunkin Donuts in Friday. And so the name Dunkunsthalle is a combination of Kunsthalle, which some of you might know as like a non-collecting arts institution. It's a word that's often used, I think, in Germany, and Dunkin. And so, this is a really cool space that, launched recently. And as far as I'm aware, I think it's one of the only spaces of its kind in Manhattan. It focuses on, historicizing and contextualizing and providing space for, emerging artists, kind of irrespective of degree status or gallery affiliation. And, for me, the interesting part is that it's often really hyper-contemporary. And so Rhizome is actually in residence at Dunkunsthalle until June 30th. And yeah, we launched with like a bookshop and exhibition in the back, and it's just a really cool space. Oh, let me see. Is this the work that's gonna play? It's fine. I can just say more about it since it's up here. But yeah, so this work is called The Maw of. It's actually at the Whitney now in Refigured, which is on the ground floor. That's like a free public space. You can just like walk in and check it out. It's a group show, so there'll be other like interesting digital artists there. But this is a KW and Whitney commission. It launched at the KW at an anatomical theater, and I bring that up because the research that was done there in the 1800s actually relates to the research behind this project now. So with this project, Rachel is kind of investigating like the brain and machine interfaces that kind of, inform our devices, and talks about the impact of like structures and how technology shapes our attention. This is kind of a point just to branch off of, to think about things like autonomy and different structures. One of the structures we're talking about today, of course, is the traditional art world. And I'm wondering if maybe, let's see, if I click to this one, that should be fine for as we continue. But yeah, I think, so my first question, is kind of like, well, what is the trad art world, right? Everyone kind of has an idea of it. And to start, I'm gonna read a little excerpt by an author named Martin Herbert. It's from his book called Tell Them I Said No. So yeah, this is from the intro, very first few words. They make me feel dirty and inadequate, those websites. The ones featuring couples and groups, tides of bodies, old and young. You've probably looked at the photographs too, taken at openings and dinners and parties. Artists with arms slung eagerly around dealers and collectors, grinning for the flash. Available, biddable, ugh. But still I look. In the past, I even supplied content. And when I look, I sometimes think of Stanley, who's never there. Of Stanley, Albert, Katie, David, Lori, and others. Past and present habitués of the opposite, of there. So this is a book on refusal, and some of the artists that he's mentioning are like Stanley Brown and people who have kind of like opted out of other structures of like visibility that I think usually, are necessary or encouraged in order for artists to be successful. But I'm gonna pass this to Paul and to Simon, just to maybe quickly answer like what trad art maybe is or has meant to you.
I love the term trad art. I feel like as I imagine it, it is what people expect, a kind of circuit of like artists, commercial and nonprofit galleries, and then museums, and then the kind of circular flow between them, and then above that kind of collectors and donors and boards in traditionally kind of European style institutions in the West. I think that's what comes to mind when I think of traditional art world, and the divisions being, illusory to a certain extent, like fantastical in another way, like the museum is a nonprofit space, the commercial gallery is a commercial space. That, of course, being a lot more perforated than the illusion would make it seem. But I think that, that comes to mind when I think of the trad art world.
Yeah, totally. I did like obviously a lot of research just going into developing Strada and, traditional art market, a lot of the commercial sphere, but just institutional spaces in general lead with, 85% of artists within institutional spaces are white and 86% are male. But beyond that lack of diversity, I think it's just more like the temporary aspect of these sort of like commercial spaces, given, the historically, all galleries only last one generation. So it's kind of a question of like, okay, understanding that that doesn't seem ideal to me personally. How do we create something that's like a bit more intergenerational, outside of, that original founder? How do we create something that's a bit more long-lasting, and create an infrastructure for artists and collectors and people affiliated with that institution to grow off of? I think it's really amazing that this is one of the things I think is amazing about museums. I don't think everything's amazing about museums, but I do love that sort of like intergenerational aspect of museums, that they're able to last beyond that initial founder.
That's really interesting too, because I think, there are sacrifices that are made in terms of like what makes something last. Like even the materials, right, in an object that require a lot of conservation or money, or even may influence like things like acquisition, site-specific artworks. Maybe someone draws something on a wall. What does that mean for its like commercial viability? But Paul, I think I like what you said about lowering the barrier of entry, and I think Arkive too, right? It's like you can apply and join, and I think the art world, as economic inequality has increased, can be pretty feudal. Not F-U-T-I-L-E, but feudal, like that medieval stuff, like lords and ladies and serfs. Where it's like, small spaces, especially in New York, where like it's just so expensive. Small spaces might exist as like a flash in the pan, and then there are these large galleries, right, who really get to, it's classic. But I don't know, I think like, let's talk about money. And then I actually want to turn it over to you guys. I think, I have plenty of questions, but part of the interesting part of a panel is getting to talk to other people. So let's talk about money.
Yeah, I think the money question is pretty central. I think even hearing you speak, Paul, about the kind of like itinerant nature of Strand, and then also thinking of Arkive not having a physical space, and how many other kind of roving, kind of itinerant projects I've heard of. I think on one hand, it affords a certain amount of flexibility and kind of context specificness. I also can't help but think it's also a factor of the economic like conditions in which people are trying to find space, right? It's just like harder and harder to try to hold down a lease at one place. And rather than putting capital into that, right, people are choosing to invest it in people or in programming in a different way. But I think the money question is also interesting in that there is this like, I guess we've been hinting at this traditional distinction between kind of like nonprofit art institutions and then commercial galleries. The idea being that in a museum, the commercial impulses are like expunged, or at least warded off to the best of their ability, whereas in other spaces that is a factor that's considered, right? It's not the only factor by any means, but having less of a kind of like Philistine like outlook, where it's like only nonprofits are doing the like most experimental creative work. That's just like absolutely not true, and I feel like trying to think through the ways in which funding is happening, and board structures of museums themselves coming from large donors, as we've seen from the protests of the last couple of years. But just some like, I guess, initial thoughts around that. It feels pretty central to me, to this question of, you can have a small, scrappy art space, but then how do you scale it to the size of a museum that can last for 100 years or something like that? I think, as you said.
Yeah, I mean, how does Arkive deal with that, or just those structures?
Yeah, so Arkive is otherwise like, it is a traditional company. Like, it is a for-profit tax denomination. And the idea being that down the line, the value of the collection could be used to back a coin that would then be a self kind of resource-filling entity, so that it wouldn't have to rely on a board of trustees in order to fund itself. So the idea being that it would need a certain amount of seed capital, and then it would acquire a collection, and then launch a coin based on the value of that collection. And then the use of that coin would produce more revenue for it to acquire more artwork. And the idea behind this being that if in a traditional museum, the board is both the wallet and the curatorial kind of positioning of a museum, this is trying to separate some of those so that those who are funding are not necessarily also the people who are picking exactly what's going into it. I think it's presented a lot of challenges, and there have been discussions of breaking off and creating a nonprofit branch within Arkive, because I do think that there is like a commercialization kind of like onslaught that in some ways is like practical and in other ways can hinder the types of programming that someone can do, right? If you're trying to assess, well, will this accrue in value in 10 years? That's not the type of question you want to be asking about a show that you want to have, you know?
No, it's interesting that you mentioned, possibly spinning off a nonprofit part. I think since Rhizome has such a, presence in, like art and tech in general, we've been, thinking about what would it mean to have a DAO that maybe funds not just us, right, but other peer organizations and things like that. But there's a lot of legal red tape, and we should definitely talk. But I just want to bring something that Rachel has also talked to me about in the room, which is, being in FIDI, right? Like art is probably one of the last completely unregulated financial markets. And so what does it look like to actually engage that and to be site specific with the space that's in FIDI? Does it look like, as she's ramping up or the space is ramping up, does it look like engaging kind of like like an Indy 500 style wall of ads? Or is that a way to kind of make plain the funding structures that often, are kind of silently behind a lot of our efforts? Rhizome's a nonprofit. We fundraise our entire budget every year. And that influences, the amount that we're able to impact from year to year, despite, our really long history. But Paul, I really like what you're doing with Strada, and I think we have a lot to learn from that and from the idea of seeing a partner as not someone who chooses you, right, but someone that you choose. And there's a lot of like deference, I think, that happens when you're talking to a patron or have some like with someone that has money. And I'm just curious how you approach that, how it's supporting your vision, and if you have any, hacks or advice for people in the room.
Yeah, for sure. I guess the question is, how to sort of approach a partner for an event that you want to have. How do you sort of navigate that? I think that the most important thing is to have like a very particular vision and like a very clear understanding of like the sort of like the brand or the image that you are trying to share with the world. Because obviously the partner that you choose highly impacts that. You publicly announce to however many people are a part of your community that you're now working with this other organization that also has a very well-known sort of brand or image or mission behind it. You have to make sure that the two pair very well together. So yeah, beyond having a very clear understanding of like who you are and who you want to work with, making sure that meshes well, it's really about making sure you don't lose that. I feel like a lot of people, when trying to negotiate with different partners about working with them, often will be fixated on just the name alone of being like, oh, I'm working with Apple now, or oh, like I'm working with Sony, and not fully evaluating the whole, like every aspect of that relationship. I learned from somebody else who's a lot older and way more established, Antoine Sargent, who's a really he's an amazing curator. He honestly, he was sharing his process, which is that anytime he approaches a partnership, it's asking for every resource that they have available that they can bring to the table. And then evaluating after that whether it makes sense to move forward. I always love to just like take some knowledge and then take it a step further. So for this one, it's been like having all of that available, but then also seeing who else is in that arena. So for example, for the sports partnership, obviously wanted someone who has a very clear mission and statement, a really well-respected image within the athletics realm. So the first two people that I did approach, which made sense, were Nike and Adidas. Obviously, clear competitors, but the thought process there was, how do we, as a smaller brand, and just like, myself and my team, how do we, establish ourselves? We should be just as well respected, given that we are bringing our own value input as these larger corporations. Obviously, they have like funding and resources, but we have the value add of our community and the people that we've been able to bring to the table, as well as our unique model that Strada is. So why should we not use that to our leverage? So present it to both of them and then let them, go back and forth and then kind of let them fight it out. And then the best one won. So we're working with Nike, and that's who we'll be working with going forward. But obviously, it's not just like, what do we do on a one-off? Everything we want to do is a strategic long-term vision. So the strategic long-term vision with the athletics partnership is that every time that there's a major art fair, such as now being Nada and Freeze, there's also going to be a Strada x Nike activation where we bring in the creative community to engage in movement, not just for the physical wellness or like the excitement of it all, but also for like just the physical and mental wellness that is very important, I think, to have within any sort of practice, but especially in the creative practice, where I feel it starts off in high school, that divide between artists and the more athletic people or athletes at the time. And then as we get older, that divide just grows and people don't feel as comfortable engaging in athleticism or engaging in movement because they don't see themselves within those communities. So how do we, as people that people feel very comforted by, engage people and bring them in and invite them to participate in this sort of movement? So yeah, every time you'll see us, in the fall, in September, at the Armory during that week. And then you'll also see us at Art Basel, and then that'll conclude year one. But obviously, long-term goal, obviously, is that every time there's a major art fair on a global scale, ideally, we would want to be there as well. And that just, one, helps us expand our reach, our mission, and grow our community even more, but also helps, the people that we're partnering with engage with a more creative community that they themselves did not have access to before.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So yeah, I want to open it up to discussion, comments, questions. If you can, you feel free to just, project your voice. But if you need a little help, you can come closer. I've got a mic. It's on a cord, but I'll do my best. And yeah. In the back. Hi.
I would just love to hear a little bit more about the audience that's engaging with Strada and Arkive. As you're both kind of talking about making these projects more accessible, or thinking about accepting artwork and making that more of like a democratic practice, or collecting work, making that more accessible. So obviously looking at maybe like a younger crowd, or someone with less access to means, but curious who you're finding is actually using Arkive and Strada. And if it feels relevant to bring Rhizome into it too, of course, bring that into it, Makayla, but I feel like Rhizome being a more established type of project is a broader audience, but maybe just good to hear from you as well.
For sure. Yeah, we have a very ambitious and slightly delusional goal to change how the art market functions. Obviously, it's a bit harder to work with an older audience and trying to change how things have been done for the majority of their lives. So we mostly work with younger artists who are just starting out of college or under 30. As I mentioned before, the majority of the artists that we work with are from marginalized backgrounds, which then reflects into who's collecting the artworks as well. So the majority of the artworks that are more expensive in that 10K plus range, those are purchased by collectors who are in their 30s and 40s and up. But in terms of background, 90% of the collectors who are purchasing our artworks are also from marginalized backgrounds. And it's been really cool to see that 90% of our collectors are also women and non-binary. So I think we're just gonna keep doing what we're doing because aside from that social good aspect, those demographics are also the largest growing and the fastest growing art collecting demographics as well. So I'm excited for that too.
I would say for Arkive, because it is a sort of decentralized project out of the aforementioned about 2,500 members or so, there are between 35 and 40 different countries represented. And it's reflected in our staff as well. There's like 10 of us, but I'm the only one in New York. 2 people are in LA. There's 2 people in Denmark. There's 2 people in Portugal. And it is with an eye towards being very much a kind of global kind of project. That being said, I think because it was a project born somewhat out of a tech or Web3 space, there are a lot of people who work in tech in their day jobs who have an interest in art. And I would say that probably constitutes 50 to 60% of the constituency. However, the other 50 to 60% is pretty open. I would say maybe there's 20% of like art world people, like, you know, Makayla's in it, Chris Liu from the Whitney's in it. Like, it's just a reflection of kind of like how openly we are able to express to get people interested in some ways. So I think what was really important with the project was that there is a lot of like vanguardism in the tech space, and I think some of that is really useful and how that it can move quickly. But it was really important that Arkive is something that respects and leans on expertise. And so part of what is looking like in the future is that having a kind of a membership tier where people with demonstrated kind of experience within the art world have a bit more say in what happens in the kind of curatorial decisions and the Discord. But it does pretty much run the gamut in terms of globally and age-wise. I think an app is being built as we speak. I think we're going to test it for this next acquisition round, although a big barrier to entry has been use of Discord. I mean, I think it was something I had to download and like learn to use it. However, there have been people of many different ages on Discord, to much the surprise of me, a lot of people who are a lot more fluent in it than I would have thought, although we're hoping that this move to an app kind of process can also make that a little more accessible or open, so people can pick Discord or the app or the website itself too.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I'll chime in quickly. I think, you know, I've been thinking a lot about audience in terms of storytelling. It's like, you know, maybe I came into this space with one idea of like, what a digital artist look like, right? And it's probably some like cis dude in his mom's basement, like in a hoodie, coding all night. And that's not true. It's not really what Rhizome's been a part of either. And so I'm kind of torn. I'm like in this space where it's like, okay, digital culture is so big. Maybe curatorial voices are really necessary, cut through the noise. Then I'm also like, it's so big. How could a team of like a couple of people, right, really determine what's important or necessary? And so I think for me, it's about gathering. It's about kind of turning over the keys and like, yeah, like being more radically accessible with like, okay, we've accrued 25 years, whatever, of cultural capital. What does it mean to kind of just like turn it over and give trust and kind of crowdsource things that are important to us and to people? And so Rhizome started out as a listserv. So that was an audience that was kind of like self-selecting and opting in. And, you know, with I think Web 2.0, Instagram, et cetera, like our blog, which is very active, kind of became more of an Instagram. We still have community listings where we like post things, but we actually did open up a Discord. It gained like 500 members in the first week, which is really interesting. And yeah, people who want to interact with each other, right? So I think bridging the like, yeah, in real life and like global aspects are really important. But for me, I'm kind of like, yeah, digital art has a diversity problem. Digital culture doesn't. So some of my favorite digital artists right now are literally like, yeah, women rappers, et cetera. So how do we get that, you know, in the conversation? Hi, Makayla, Olivia Makayla.
I have a question because something stood out to me when you guys were talking, particularly about decentralization in like the being common for like a lot of like newer like artist focused like scrappier like organizations
feel like the way I can and speak to that is, and going off of what you were saying too, Makayla, about audience, I feel like in my time at Arkive, I have found that a concept like curating and a concept like populism are in some ways like almost categorically opposed, in the sense that you have someone who has taste, and then populist taste is like everything. And so some of the challenges of that being that when we've had what we launched this last year, we called like community-led rounds, where people can propose artworks for acquisition, and that's something that is kind of like an open run all the time. It's also that you get art that for people who are existing in the art world, they're like, we're not gonna get that like thing because of whatever kind of pre-existing tastes that we came with. And so I think it's an enduring tension. I think you're speaking more broadly to the kind of like material conditions of being forced to decentralize in some way. And I think part of that manifests in, I think for me, questions around like taste and like what tastes we are funded and what tastes are not funded, which tastes are supported by the market, which are not supported by the market. Yeah, I'd be curious to hear what you guys think about that too.
Yeah, I mean, it's just what people want, you know? Like, especially for Gen Z audiences, people just want the opportunity to vote. People want to have more decision making. I'm very curious to see where that goes. I don't know, I don't know.
Yeah, I think if I can just pop in with another question for you both, because I think that was a really great question. Speaking of like decentralization, right? It's like there's this networking nature. You know, I was like, networking up has never worked for me. Like peer-to-peer networking is where it's at. And I think just like, who are people in your lives, in your community, who kind of inspire you, or other organizations that you like it's shout out time. And then I'm going to ask also like how we can support you.
Yeah, I think the conversation around decentralization is like in some ways novel, in some ways it's like very much a thing that's been happening, or that marginalized communities have had to sort of produce their own spaces, where I think of like Jam, just above Midtown, which just had a show at MoMA, but for many years in the 60s and 70s was shut out completely of MoMA, run by Linda Good Bryant, and was showing artists like Senga Ngudi and David Hammonds, as well as like collectives in Chinatown. But these days I feel like I look at projects like Recess in Brooklyn that have always, existed within a 501c3 structure, but also had a lot of projects with recently incarcerated youth. So the answer, I feel like, to that is partly that in some ways the question around decentralization is new in some ways. In other ways, there have been people, the Studio Museum in Harlem, like there are so many historical examples of kind of projects in the New York space that have shifted their focus away from the institution to build their own kind of spaces. So I think it's an illustrious history that maybe the overuse of the word decentralization can kind of cloud, but that there have been a lot of these kind of alternative institutions that exist.
Do you want to talk a bit more about
what
you guys need? Or?
Oh, no, go ahead.
You can talk about, I guess, the first part, and then I'll ask the support part too.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, decentralization plays a huge key, and I think it's be very important how organizations build that into their existing structure, or if you're a new organization, how do you build around decentralization? But as you were talking about before, and like how you're examining how to keep that curatorial practice there, either by having different tiers within the organization or in other ways, I think that is also very important as well. I think, as we're looking at both digital art and physical art as well, I feel like a common critique of digital art is that it's like the art is terrible. I mean, you look at physical art. The majority of physical art is like really bad. So I think, you know, just having people who are in that position to, you know, sift through different works and select works is extremely important. But I also think that, you know, stopping it there doesn't really do justice to curators overall, because it's not just about selecting works, you know, like who are the people who are going to be, you know, connecting the underlying themes, whether like theories or philosophies behind the artist and their long-term goals for, you know, group exhibitions, and making sure that everything weaves together very well beyond just that aesthetic value. And, you know, making sure that we have people who are either voted into those roles by the larger community or are placed there in other ways is going to be really important.
Cool. But yeah, who's doing work that you like right now, or who's in your community that kind of is supporting you, or that you admire?
My team. They're the like the
Yeah.
best. Beyond our team. There's, you know, it's kind of lonely, I think, just being like, you know, on like the younger end of galleries in New York. So I kind of don't really go to other people's exhibitions. Occasionally I will, though. There's a friend of mine, Hannah Traore, who also just opened up her gallery in the Lower East Side on Orchard Street, who does amazing programming, also focusing mostly on women and non-binary artists, and also artists from marginalized backgrounds, with amazing taste, and also working to include fashion as well within the fine art space. And, you know, I'm going to keep exploring. It's a goal of mine beyond, you know, work and beyond getting more sleep. Another goal of mine for the summer and the fall is to be more social. So hope to see you at more exhibitions.
Cool. Thanks, Paul. Okay, last question is, yeah, how can we support you?
I mean, I think in terms of Arkive, it would be so great if any of you applied. I think really what it is right now is just having more people participate in it, shape it as it's becoming a thing. Anybody can join the Discord. Anybody can go to the website and apply and participate. You know, the next acquisition round is happening on Monday. You know, please do apply, join, and participate, shape it into what you want it to be. I think it's a kind of fun experiment. Yeah.
Also, Simon has a book coming out.
Unrelated to Arkive, but I have essays on art and my family coming out next year. Yeah, thanks, Makayla.
Yeah, if anyone's interested in joining Strada, either as artist or collector, or as a general community member, we have those opportunities coming up soon. In June, we're hosting our first public Strada Athletics Club event. For anyone here in New York, we'll have a surf club. So if you want to come surf, meet other artists and collectors, you can come. And then September will be our next in-person exhibition. And most likely we'll have multiple exhibitions throughout the fall leading into Art Basel, Miami.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for joining today. And oh, go ahead.
It's a question to Simon. A bit technical, but to understand also how Arkive works when dealing with DAOs, where we've had many examples in the past, you know, that talk about being decentralized openness, that end up being in a model of first come, first serve, buy a token while it's cheap, and then kind of it's hard to get into. So how do people, when people apply, do they need to acquire a token? Does the token, the amount of token you have, give more power of vote for voting or not? And what's kind of right now the resources, the funding that are used to acquire artworks? Where does it come from? Because you said it's not right now based on the tokens, right?
Yes, organizations like Friends with Benefits or things that other people hear of, you typically have to buy in with a token that's less expensive in the beginning and then gets more expensive as it becomes more desirable. Arkive does not have a token. You don't have a buy-in. I think it was really important for me, at least, that if I was going to be involved, that a financial barrier was not the kind of reason to exclude people from it. That may change maybe down many years down the line or something, but for as long as I'm there, for now there's no token, and it's purely based on participation. It's like every time you post in the Discord, you kind of have a little more sway in some ways. And otherwise it's funded as any other traditional seed company would be funded, with investors and seed investors, and the founder, Tom McLeod, comes from Tech World. So he had an interest in art, and then he had been raising the money and then kind of handed it over to the art people. But happy to talk more about it too. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Well, yeah, thanks everyone for coming today. I'm sure we'll be around for a little bit after. So yeah, catch us before you leave. And yeah, thanks Paul, thanks Simon. Thank you, Emily. Yeah.